Hey everybody, Dan Orcs Harrison here and welcome to the Mobalytics patch 1022 tier list. There hasn't been a ton of changes on this patch, but we went into some extra detail just with how important it is for you to gain all the LP you can in these last 2 weeks before the end of the season. 10th of November is when preseason hits, so be sure to get some games in if you're wanting to hit your end of season goals. So moving on to the list itself, for top lane our S tier roster is Garen, Darius, Urgot with god tier picks Malphite, Shen and Fiora. Now, not much has moved in the top lane. I'm sad to say Udyr top lane didn't quite make the impact we expected. It's definitely better than before the buffs, but the win rate hasn't reflected in it being A tier. That being said, I still believe the pick is pretty strong, so if you picked it up and you're finding success, don't be discouraged. We also did see a buff to Nasus on this patch. Instead of his ultimate stacking resistances, it now instantly gives him a ton. This change makes his dueling even better, as if it needed help, and allows you to manage all-ins a lot better post 6. Unfortunately, this doesn't really change Nasus' core issues in that he struggles heavily when set behind and is immobile. So definitely a positive change, but he hasn't moved tiers as a result. However, we do expect to see him performing better on the upper end of A tier. Now, taking a look at some of our top lane picks, first up is Urgot. Urgot has been chilling in our S tier for quite a bit of time now, and with good reason. The champion can become an absolute monster when ahead. The damage output combined with the bulkiness makes him really hard to deal with. Against melee champions, he can capably deal with them and they'll find it hard to deal with his shotgun legs and flip, but even against ranged champions, he's able to farm reasonably well from a distance, and all he needs is one opportunity to find a flash flip into an ult to find a kill. Teamfights are really solid as well for Urgot. His consistent damage is solid enough that he doesn't fall flat on his face very often, and if you're able to connect your ult, the execute and AoE fear are super powerful. Urgot has some unique mechanics to pick up if you're trying him out. One tip I can give is when someone is under the execute threshold of your ultimate, you have to reactivate it, as it doesn't just pull them in by itself. That's something I had to learn when I first played him way back when he was reworked, and definitely earned me some flame from my teammates when I didn't really understand how it worked. Now we're going to move on over to Kayle, and I'm highlighting Kayle not just because of a solid win rate, but a new build has been flying around High-ELO to solid success. Starting off, the first item is Sanguine Blade. The combination of AD, lifesteal, attack speed and lethality gives you a huge one item spike. You will miss out on some of those stats if you're within range of multiple enemy champions. This really lends itself to Kayle's split pushing strength. Next item is Storm Razor, and this allows you to easily kite or chase thanks to the slow proc combined with your Q. Following on from that, you build a range of crit items. This makes it pretty hard to itemize against your AP damage in your kit and the crit damage you're building. And on top of that, your burst and DPS are both huge. Kayle is always a monster in the late game, but the earlier spikes available in this build allow it to get there way easier. Kayle is still going to be a tad weaker pre-6 due to a lack of range, but the later the game goes, the more and more you'll have the capability to solo carry the game. Finally, we're looking at a champion who is incredibly frustrating to deal with, as I'm sure you've experienced, and that is Fiora. Now, Fiora has been performing solidly at lower elos. She's the queen of late game and causes huge issues to uncoordinated teams with a split push threat or skirmishing. Fiora isn't the best team fighter, so if you're looking to pick her up, make sure you join team fights later on when less crowd control tools are available, and look to utilize your parry for any that are left over. Fiora's 2 item spike is massive, and she's only getting stronger from there, but you gotta be cautious in the early levels, however, as a bad trade can make it difficult to recover to a position where you can safely farm. Playing around your vitals is critical as well. Not only do you get bonus damage, but also healing, and then when your ult is procced, it's important you get all 4 because you get that large AoE heal. Now if you're playing against Fiora, a solid tip is to position yourself against a wall so she can't proc the last vital and get that huge heal. Now moving to the role that really needs to gank my lane more, we're looking at jungle. In S tier we have Warwick, Vi, Hecarim, Nunu, Fiddlesticks, Kha'Zix, Rammus, and alone in god tier we have Kayn. Now in terms of changes to the jungle, we saw some heavy nerfs to Karthus in terms of a whopping 5 whole damage on his Q. Now jokes aside, this is actually a significant change, as that 5 damage nerfed doubles to 10 when he's landed his Q on isolated targets. On top of that, with the amount he spams it, the nerf actually really adds up. Now, Karthus is still in B tier as he isn't underperforming at lower elos anyway, but this nerf definitely ensures that he isn't climbing up anytime soon. Sejuani received a buff to her ultimate damage, but realistically this isn't going to change much about her. She always struggles to perform in solo queue even when she's strong in the competitive meta, and at the moment she can't keep up with farming junglers and she can't match ganking junglers either. It's just not a good time to be playing it. Now you may have noticed Brand is on the jungle tier list. No, I'm not insane. Well, maybe a little. With the changes to Brand's E now always spreading, and the fact he can bounce his R against himself, Brand actually has good jungle clear after level 3. On top of that, the R changes mean after level 6 he can hold his own far better if he's caught out or attacked in the river. We're still waiting to see how Brand performs in the jungle, but we're keeping our eyes on him for this patch. Now first up, we're taking a look at Fiddlesticks. He is an absolute low elo stomper. He has sustain in the jungle, strong CC, decent clear, but most importantly he heavily punishes teams without vision, and in the lower ranks when wards are optional, Fiddle can easily find angles to jump in with his ultimate. And if you're out of vision when you jump in, you get an AoE fear on all the targets you hit, so it's absolutely huge. It's so powerful winning teamfights, and this champion can absolutely 1v9. In the early levels, your fear is a big tool for dealing with aggressive enemy junglers, so be careful about using it too early as it can leave you in a rough spot. When clearing camps, there is a couple of spots where you can aggro camps together and use your W to hit both at the same time, specifically Gromp and Blue Buff together and Red Buff and Raptors. There's a sweet spot where both are aggroed onto you and won't reset, and this really helps to speed up your clear substantially. Halloween's coming soon and Fiddle is ready to spook your solo queue games. Rammus is next on the list, and he's performing solidly enough that we've bumped him up to S tier, and he found that absolutely okay. Rammus performs well into any AD champions as his itemization is super easy and he gets big benefits for building armor. On top of that, he's the bane of AD carries everywhere. When we talk about champions like Samira who are hyper mobile and can decimate, Rammus just stops her in her tracks. Now the build I'm showing recommends Aftershock, but Predator is a solid option if you want to be more aggressive on Rammus and try to dictate plays. Either way, his speed with which he can engage, his taunt combined with his knockup, and honestly his sheer amount of damage you can do as a full tank is really oppressive. Rammus is a great ganker, so look to find windows to snowball your team in a positive direction, and when it comes to teamfight, finding access to the enemy carries will set you up for an easy win. Lastly for jungle is Shyvana. Our role expert Nalty heavily rates the champion, and honestly the stats are looking pretty good too. AP Shyvana is really oppressive. Her farming is solid, as Shyvana's always is, but once she gets access to her ultimate she can roast teams alive. Her Fire Breath does such an insane amount of damage with her ultimate up, and if you hit it onto a squishy target, often they just instantly have to leave the fight, they're so chunked. CDR is hugely important for her, hence the runic echoes into Nash's Tooth build, and the more CDR, the more you can spam your E, which you are looking to max first for that huge poke. In terms of play patterns, don't try to go too far in as you will be fairly squishy compared to a bruise or a tank Shyvana. A lot of the time you want to ult to reposition and then spam your Flame Breath from a distance. Without your ult you are way less useful, but whenever you auto attack your Fury builds up, so be sure to clear camps frequently while your ult is down to get it back up ASAP. Another tip is to try and find opportunities to fight in choke points. The initial damage from Shyvana's E is huge, but while you're ulting it also leaves a dot burn on the ground. I've seen so many players just standing this without paying attention, and the consistent damage is massive. Next is mid lane, and our S tier roster is Annie, Fizz, Yone, Yasuo, and for God tier we have Zed. Now for changes in the mid lane, we've seen Zed get a very minor nerf to his E damage. It's 20 less damage at max rank, but realistically on Zed you max it second, so that nerf only comes in during the mid game and the amount of damage is minor. I really don't think this will do much to affect him, as by the time the nerf comes in, Zed usually either is dominating the game or has fallen too far behind to be relevant. We did see some buffs on LeBlanc's E, a bit of damage and reduced mana cost, but LeBlanc isn't a great solo queue performer at the best of times, especially at lower ranks, so we won't see any movement from her in the tiers. Now Annie's change is a bit of an interesting one for mid lane. Being able to shield your allies is a nice touch for fighting 2v2s with your jungler and in situations later in the game. Ultimately the base shield at level 1 is pretty low, and as a mid lane Annie you're not going to max it till last. Our mid expert Command Attack, who is a massive Annie advocate, isn't a big fan of this change for mid lane, but he still thinks Annie is a huge performer because of the rest of the kit, so she's holding her spot in S tier. Sylas moved down just as he's struggling to find consistent performance at lower ranks. Sylas is in the spot where he's pretty difficult to play, as you have to be able to effectively utilize almost every ultimate in the game, and his play patterns aren't as simple as other assassins. Champions like Zed, Talon and Echo are much easier to play when looking to dive enemy backlines, but Sylas is super reliant on hitting his E, and as a result he's been struggling to find the results, so he's dropped down a tier. Swain also is feeling a bit of out of place in the mid lane. Ultimately he's having far more success either bot lane or support, and it's because he lacks the early wave clear to really do much mid. Long cooldowns on his Q before he has points in it means he can be shoved in and harassed, and although in the mid game he becomes much more of a menace, this is much easier to reach when paired up with an ally in the bot lane. Now, Brand as a first champ we're going to highlight for mid lane. He's had some big changes which we think really allow him to flourish in the mid lane. His E now always spreads to nearby enemies, and if his passive is active it spreads an even bigger distance. This makes clearing waves so much easier. Pressing E then W means you get strong AoE combined with the W increased damage, and honestly that change alone would be enough for me to be looking at him for mid lane, but he also now has been changed so his ultimate can bounce to him, not just enemies. Every Brand player knows the frustration when you don't have enough nearby enemy champions, minions, jungle monsters, Teemos or anything else to bounce to, but with this change your dueling potential is much better. If you're getting targeted by an assassin there's a much better chance you'll be able to hold them off. If you're playing Brand, look to abuse the new spread mechanic on a Z to hit the enemy laner. The increased range is a nifty trick, as well as it reaches 600 range if you use your E on a target who is ablaze. As always, landing 3 abilities procs your passive explosion, and landing your stun is the easiest way to set that up. Next up is Neeko, and she's been holding up really well in the mid lane and as a result has been bumped up to A tier. Her wave clear is solid, but the big thing is the CC setup she has to fight in skirmishes. Landing your root and following up with a pop blossom isn't quite enough to 100-0 someone unless you're mega fed, but allows your teammates to follow up and finish out the damage. With the Glacial Augment build, that is your game plan. Set up slows and CC and chunk people down so you can land a huge ultimate or your teammates can follow up. Neeko is great at setting plays up this way, and her ultimate pop blossom is such a strong game winning ultimate that's so satisfying to land. Remember in lane, if you hit a route through minions, it will last longer, allowing you to get max Q procs onto your opponent. Also be sure to use your autos when trading. Not only do you proc your W for extra damage and movement speed, but because you're taking Glacial Augment, you'll also slow your opponents, allowing for an easy route to follow up. Now next up is AD carry. In S tier we have Ashe, Misfortune, Jinx, Caitlyn, Samira, and in God tier we have Jhin. Samira took some hits this patch, her base AD and armor got trimmed a little. Now this isn't enough to take her from S tier as she really was OP prior to this change, but I will emphasize that this is significant. She'll do less damage in trades and will take more damage. Definitely gives her a few more windows for her opponents to punish her. Xayah receives some attack speed per level, a nice change, but ultimately she's still struggling against the current meta of long range AD carries, and with a huge ultimate cooldown, she's still in B tier, but we have our eyes on her in case she starts to pick up speed. Honing in on one of our S tier picks, we're looking at Ashe. She did receive a minor change with the number of arrows released on her W, which scales with rank now. It went from 9 all the time to starting at 7 and building up to 11. Now since you max this ability you'll break even at level 5 and start to gain ground after that. Ultimately this change wasn't super significant, and although it'll hurt her early shove a tiny bit, she'll pick up speed late game. She's a super powerful pick at the moment. Her wave clear and long range makes her problematic to deal with in the bot lane, and at 6 her ultimate allows her to decimate bot lanes in the 2v2. Later in the game her sustained damage is solid, and coupled with the utility of her Hawkshot and ultimate, she offers a lot to the team even if behind. Her constant slows mean you can have an easier time kiting, and as soon as your Q is stacked the flurry really can shred through any target comfortably. Ideally look to be paired with support who can help follow up on your arrows, or who can peel for you and keep you safe. Either way, positioning is key on Ashe. If you manage to avoid being challenged, you'll easily be able to carry team fights. Next up is Jinx, who also received a minor change on this patch where her traps deal instant damage instead of over time. This change isn't really enough to adjust things, but she has seen a rise because of how she's finding her place in the meta. Jinx is able to hold up against the range of Jhin, Ashe and Caitlyn thanks to her rockets, and that's a big factor in surviving bot lane laning phase at the moment. Combine that with her insane late game and teamfight potential, and it's really a bad situation to have a Jinx on your team. One kill in a fight is enough for it to start to snowball, and her carry potential is only really outpaced by AD carries like Twitch, and she has a much easier time to get into the point where she can carry. On top of that, our AD carry expert Yen has seen people using Jinx as a Samira counter. Her massive range advantage makes things tricky for Samira to close the gap, and should she attempt to do so, Jinx's traps will stop her mid-dash if she tries to cross them. If you're wanting to carry your last games of the season, then Jinx is definitely the champ to do so. Finally for AD carries is MF. She's not got the same scaling as the other S tier AD carry picks, but her laning can be devastating. She's a huge bully, and landing just one bounce from a Q can chunk your opponent and send them back to base. In teamfights her ult can decimate, but finding the timing to use it is the key thing. Ideally some CC can force the enemy team to stay still, but keep an eye out for champions which can threaten your positioning and interrupt your ult. If you're playing MF, look to apply pressure in the laning phase and try and build up an early lead. The extra movement speed from your passive means if you find a solid opportunity to recall and buy an item to have an advantage, you'll be back in your lane in time to catch the wave. One mistake I see some players make is spamming your E. The damage isn't that high and the mana cost can easily make you wound. If you're looking for an all-in, the extra damage and the slow are useful, but it's not a great poke tool. Save your mana for when you need it. Last but certainly not least, we're looking at support. In S tier we have Blitzcrank, Brand, Soraka, Lux, Janna, Thresh, and in God tier it's Leona and Lulu. Now, talking changes for the patch, big one is Brand. He's been a solid performer in the bot lane for a decent amount of time, and although the changes they're making are more tailored towards mid lane, they still help him out bot. The always spreading E and bouncing R means you'll more consistently find damage on your opponents, and before this patch support Brand was bordering on S tier. Pantheon has dropped down at A. The nerfs last patch weren't hugely impactful, but they were enough to bring him in a bit more in line, and it's now even more punishing if you fall behind. At lower ranks in particular, it's becoming a bit harder to find consistent success in the champion and keep the ball rolling. Senna has also moved down to B tier. At the moment he's outperforming in the AD carry role substantially. I think the problem with Senna support is that often it's picked up with another AD carry and it leaves both of you fairly vulnerable. If you're targeted by dive or heavy engage, there isn't as much appeal as having, say, a Janna. I still think Senna support can work well, especially if paired with a good lane partner and in the right matchup, but at the moment she's struggling to consistently show that at low elo. Now, something I am super hyped for is Annie. She's received a significant change that makes her E a flat shield and allows her to place on allies. This is huge. Annie's CC and damage already allowed her to function as a support way back in the day when people played her there, but this shield now allows her to offer some more defensive utility to a lane partner, and I think is the big change to bring her back into the role. Now, I know a lot of you will think Annie should go full AP, and I'm sure some of you will build her that way regardless of what I say, but looking at the numbers and speaking to our experts, I think the best build is E max with more defensive utility. Her shield gets so much benefit from putting points into it compared to her Q and W, which just get damage. She gets lower cooldown, plus 50 shield per rank, and more damage reflected. A few points in the E makes it more durable, and if you're fighting 2v2, the reflective damage can decimate the enemy AD carry if they're trying to land consistent auto attacks. With the build, we think Shirelia's will definitely be a staple item for her. There's a lot of flexibility in what other items you can take, so we encourage you to try it and see what works, but we've put together a build which we think would be a good start. Ares synergizes super well with Annie. Her long range auto attacks can consistently harass with it, and the extra shielding goes a long way to bulk out her E in the early levels. Look to maintain your passive stack so you have a stun available for all ins, and consistently use your autos to get damage down. At 6 you have huge engage potential with your ultimate, and you could use Shirelia's to find those windows and start team fights. I'm personally going to be playing a bunch of Annie this patch, and I'm convinced she's going to be a solid pick for the support role. Feel free to give her a go and let me know what you think. Okay, I'll calm down about Annie for a second. Next we're looking at Soraka, and Soraka is incredibly hard to deal with. Previous wounds becomes a necessity to even bring her healing to reasonable levels, and she scales incredibly well. That's not to say she's weak early though. Her harass and sustain with the Q and her zoning potential with the E actually makes it really hard to deal with her. Even strong engaged champions like Leona can struggle, as Soraka's silence can lock her out of her kit. One of the big strengths of Soraka is to become another target the other team has to deal with. Not only do they have to kill your carries, but Soraka becomes a carry just by her healing output. In teamfights, try to maintain solid positioning. You don't need to be super close to the fight, just in range to heal. Look to occasionally move forwards to throw down Qs to help keep your HP up, and find key windows to land your E. Your ult gets huge bonus effectiveness when allies are low HP, and there's a visual indicator to show that, so watch out for it to get that maximum effectiveness. If you're playing into Soraka, an early executioner's calling is extremely valuable to pick up even as soon as you're first back. Last for this week is Lux. Now, she made a big resurgence when Caitlyn came in as a god tier pick due to their great synergy, but despite the nerfs to Caitlyn, she's still holding out well. At the moment, she's performing strongly in most lanes even without Caitlyn. The pool of long range AD carries work well with her harass, and at 6 the extra damage of her ultimate is great in 2v2s. There's two schools of thought for Lux builds. There's the Guardian Lux who maxes W and builds shield buffing items. She's good into engage champions as the thick shield helps to keep you alive, and later in the game the huge AoE shield stacking is great for keeping your team alive. Then there's the Comet Lux who looks to build AP and damage, and this can be really effective at combating enchanters like Lulu and Janna. Catching a bind against them can be enough to pop them, and if your team finds some engage you can assist from a huge distance away with your ultimate. This flexibility in builds really helps to give Lux solid matchups, but ultimately it also comes down to personal preference. Either way, she's performing super well at gold/plat ranks. And that's us wrapped up for the patch 1022 low elo tier list. We want to wish you the best of luck with your solo queue games, and I hope you all reach your goals for the end of season. Next week, the item changes from the preseason will be hitting the live server, and we'll be sitting down with the role experts and getting their insight into which items are broken and what champions will synergize with them best. So be on the lookout because a 1023 vid will be a big one. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, then feel free to subscribe so you can keep up with every patch. If you've got any questions, thoughts, or even just want to tell me what your goals are for the end of the season, then feel free to drop a comment. See you all on the next video.